Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Development Strategies for Platform Devices, Navigating Regulatory Complexities, Formulation, Compliance, and Market Approval. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you have a question for our speakers or wish to share any thoughts of your own, please submit it through the Q&A box on your screen. If you run into any problems with the stream today, please try refreshing your browser first. If your problem persists, go ahead and use the Q&A tool to submit a question, and I'll help get you back on track. This event will be available on demand, normally within about 24 hours. Just use the same link that you used today. Now, I am happy to introduce today's moderator, Scott Era, Vice President, Business Development. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. And thank you all for joining today's webinar. As Heather mentioned, my name is Scott Era, and I'm excited to talk about these development strategies. In today's rapidly evolving life science industry, the adoption of platform technologies for drug and device combination products offers significant opportunities to reduce costs, de-risk innovation, and accelerate time to market. However, navigating through some of these regulatory hurdles and challenges for platform devices appear to be complex. This webinar is really here to help explore some of the FDA's evolving stance on platform technologies and strategies to leverage proven devices, such as prefilled syringes, autoinjectors, while trying to differentiate your product in the market. Several key topics today will include, but not be limited to, bridging formulation challenges across delivery systems, for example, going from vial to prefilled syringe to autoinjector and beyond, leveraging existing data that could be compiled to streamline regulatory submissions and make it easier for you to get through submission for your therapy. Also discussing key elements of de-risking programs to ensure success and demonstrate value through safety and effectiveness while trying to be as efficient as possible. The attendees today hopefully will gain actionable insights into balancing a lot of speed to market with FDA expectations, trying to ensure successful product approval while minimizing the risks you may face through your development. And some of the key learnings we're looking to have today from the objective side is to understand the FDA's evolving approach for platform devices, trying to gain insight into regulatory expectations for drug device combination products, including recent FDA changes, which we'll talk about in a little bit, that may impact your submission timelines and any kind of communications you have with the FDA. It's also looking to optimize the regulatory strategies for platform technology that is out there on the market today. How to effectively bridge formulation changes that you're working on currently and maybe in the future, and trying to gain some efficiencies through some of this across delivery systems, such as vial to prefilled syringe, and then into an autoinjector and beyond. But also we're looking at minimizing and mitigating risks while trying to accelerate your product to market, trying to explore some key elements of finding ways to minimize any challenges or hurdles that you may have for your program, but find the right way to maintain compliance as we see fit. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce our panelists. So I want to start with Chris Menzer here. He's our Vice President of Innovation and Development at Hasselmeyer, and he's been there for 4 years. He's a titan in the industry, and so we welcome his expertise and knowledge from a platform delivery perspective. And we're excited to hear some of his insights from a platform device and how they can actually be utilized for your novel therapy that you're looking to bring to market. Next panelist I'm bringing on here is Rachel Ward. She's the Director of Emerging Enterprises at Chymanox. She has over 10 years experience in the industry in various roles, primarily focusing on a lot of the regulatory landscape changes and assessments that's out there, and has been a real novel approach to understanding those challenges from a regulatory perspective and how they can be a leverage for making a more efficient and effective submission. Next panelist we'll have is Ryan Doxey. He is actually over 20 years. This is an earlier picture of him. He's the last 3 years at Chymanox. He might have put on a little more gray hairs, but just that's probably because of all the formulation changes that he has seen and helping navigate through them for a lot of the clients that he is supporting. And last, and certainly least, is me. We're going to try to get through this pretty quickly. I am Scott Era, Vice President of Business Development. I've been in the industry for over 25 years, and I'm going to try to move fast on my side so we can get to the actual panelists. As we mentioned before, we're going to get through about 45 minutes of panel discussion and then leave a lot of time for question and answer from our attendees. So if you can hold off to them, we'll make sure we try to address as many as possible as we work through this webinar. So first topic of conversation here is really on the platform delivery system, some of the background that we wanted to kind of walk through and really understand how platform technologies are developed and how they're actually utilized by life science clients and customers. And so from this perspective, we want to really get an objective of what the strategic importance of utilizing platform technologies are for life science companies and really setting the stage for a better way of understanding how they can be utilized going forward. Chris, in your words, just what would make platform technologies critical today for life science landscapes and companies that are looking to bring a new product to market?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think as you mentioned in the introduction, I think there's three really key benefits of using platforms. It helps reduce the time required. So by taking these off the critical path, the technology development, you're not putting that into your drug program. You don't have to foot the entire bill to develop those technologies. By using something that can be shared in the industry, we can spread those costs across different companies. And then finally, you also are minimizing your technical risk. So by having something already developed, it's one less piece to worry about. We know drug development's already a very risky enterprise. And so anything to reduce risk is really important there.
What goes into actually developing a platform delivery system?
Yeah, so at Hausmeier, when we look to develop a new platform, we have to really, because we're working ahead of a molecule, we really have to predict what our customers, the pharma companies, might need. So we really need to identify kind of target users, target therapy areas maybe. And really, we have to also fit within the other platform technologies with the industry. So, we would maybe develop something around standardized prefilled syringe technologies or cartridges. The new platform, we've got to find that space that we want to tackle with that platform and try and meet the broadest needs of our customers as we can.
Okay, no, that's great. And Rachel, just given some of the regulatory challenges that we have seen over the past few years, just in how the regulatory landscape has changed and some of the ways that people have to either submit or some of the edicts coming from the FDA, what have we seen that might affect actually the use of platform delivery systems?
Yeah, in a general sense, we've increasingly seen the FDA regulate drug delivery systems as combination products, even ones that aren't necessarily pre-filled by the manufacturer. And so this has been a bit of a shift in the industry in terms of having to think of these drug delivery systems as combination products rather than pure medical devices. So what that means from practically speaking, the general rationale, I'm not speaking for FDA here, but the general rationale is that they want to be able to review these products in the context of the full combination product, meaning what is the full risk of what you are delivering and how you are delivering it. If there's any potential for variation across that delivery based on the drug product itself, the FDA wants the opportunity to be able to essentially re-review the medical device in the context of that new drug product. So one example I'll give, the recent EDDO guidance, even though it's still in draft, you can see the language sprinkled throughout that guidance, how they're really focused on there's risks that could arise that is the combination of the drug constituent and the device constituent. It's more complex than just those two parts put together. And so they really want to be able to look at the combination product in that totality rather than each of the individual constituents. So they expect you to submit it as a combination product. And so what ends up happening is that you have a lot of internal activity that is focused on platform development. How do we leverage across? And we'll go into some of the details later on how to do this. But then you got to kind of shift your mind frame a little bit when writing the regulatory submission and really focus on looking at it as a whole individual product.
Rachel, does that really come from the primary method of action, or is that just one element of some of those particulars?
That's certainly one element. I mean, they will look at everything from the potential patients, user population, the actual manufacturing process. If there's any variations, especially when you're looking at your biologic products, there might be some variations in manufacturing that could change the way that the drug interacts with the device. You could have anything from the properties of the drug itself that potentially interact with the device and how the delivery profile is reflective of the drug that is being delivered. I mean, so there's a lot of complexities that can go into that leads to that variation that FDA wants to be able to regulate each time.
Okay. Well, that's great. Thanks, Rachel. And then going to the next slide here and talking really more about landscape. Some of the areas we want to just talk about just with the shifts, and we'll get to that in a second, Rachel. I want to just really start with Chris just on just some of the considerations in the design for platform delivery systems. What are the main thrusts and key factors in design for a platform delivery system that you have seen just over your years of experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge when you're designing a platform is you've got to balance sort of the flexibility to tackle a broad range of therapies, you know, all those variations that Rachel talked about that FDA wants to see. You want to be able to have that flexibility built in the platform, but you still have to have it standardized enough so it actually gains those benefits of you know, saving time, saving capital expenses, things like that. So it's really a balancing act of how big and how expansive can you make that platform and how flexible without turning it into something where every single variant you make ends up being a completely unique product, and now you've lost any benefit of sharing that platform and those learnings across multiple therapies.
Okay. And one of the questions I was going to ask, Chris, too, is just for someone who's starting the development of a new therapy and looking at a platform delivery system, let's just call it, let's say it's ARA Therapeutics. What are some of the key decisions that you may want, or that I would want to be thinking about when looking to select a platform? What would be some of the key things if I was going to be working with Hasselmeyer or a platform delivery system manufacturer? What should I be looking at just to make sure I'm following the right steps and looking at this properly so I'm not making ill-informed decisions or making the wrong decision that might impact me down the road?
I mean, I think there's, you know, first, I think there's one, you need to make sure there's a technical alignment. So this is more, do you know your therapy enough? Do you know your dosing range, your dosing frequency, the patient, if there's unique patient needs, anything that would be certain criterias that you could then look to make sure there's a technical fit for the platform. But then I think other side of it as well is, you know, I mean, drug delivery is not a quick business we're in. You know, I mean, this is really when you get involved with a platform company, it's a marriage, and you've got to make sure that you can really connect that, you know, that there's a fit from the way the companies do business, the relationships, have they set up the right manufacturing to make sure that they have supply, for example, maybe in US and Europe, which is maybe becoming a little more important after what's been announced this week. So you've got to look at all those business aspects as well. It really needs to be something your whole organization is looking at. It can't be just the CMC expert picking the right device that happens to fit the molecule.
And that kind of leads me to the question I was going to ask you, Rachel, which I know is the elephant in the room. Just given some of the recent news, just from the FDA or just from the political landscape, and I'm going to try to keep this, of course, political agnostic as possible. Just what would be some advice you could give to those here or just in the industry on, with all the political upheaval that is happening, or just from the FDA or other government agencies, what should they expect or could look to expect just with the landscape and how they're going to be impacted by some of these changes?
Yeah, so like you said, as objectively as possible. This week we saw...
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, this week we saw implementation of the policy to have a massive reduction in force across Health and Human Services. So we saw approximately 10,000 positions across CDC, NIH, FDA, and others be reduced. Estimates currently sit at about 3,500 positions in FDA being targeted for reduction. There's also been some heavy turnover at the leadership level as well within FDA, whether voluntary or not. So that said, there's a lot of uncertainty and unknowns in the agency right now. And, I'm in the Midwest, so I'm going to liken this to tornadoes. I would say we're at a tornado watch right now. We got a lot of signs that there's going to be some upheaval coming. There's a lot of instability in the atmosphere, but I'll be honest, the tornado hasn't hit yet. It seems like at least my perspective, day-to-day activities from the sponsor's position is running relatively normal. I still see meetings being granted. I still see reviews happening. The official word is that these reduction in force was not targeted at the reviewers themselves or the inspectors themselves. And so theoretically, things are supposed to continue from the industry side, somewhat like normal. I mean, that said, though, we can all practically look at this and see whenever you see that much turnover, there's going to be changes in day-to-day operations that I think could impact future work, whether that be, longer review times or less meetings granted and instead being shifted to WROs. So, the best thing I can advise, just like a tornado watch, grab your flashlights, charge your phones, adjust your timelines accordingly, and just kind of prepare for the worst while understanding that things are trying to progress as much as normal right now.
But they don't have to go to their safe room just yet and worry about the glass that may come in that may be impacted by this, is what you're saying.
I would say no, because like I said, I still see meetings being granted. So if you're preparing for, your type B, type C meetings, go ahead and keep doing it. I mean, that said, though, I think it is going to be really important to have ongoing conversations with the agency. And when you can get their attention, put as much into those meetings as you can, because, everything that we're talking about today is based on our experience, based on prior, approvals. Things might change tomorrow and our advice might change tomorrow. And so the more that you can interact with the agency about your product specifically, your benefit risks, I think it's going to be that much more important moving forward to really understand what the agency is expecting for your product, because it's going to be harder to rely on past experience to know what you need to do.
Would they also maybe even give an expedited review, just depending upon the type of therapy that is being introduced? Could that be also looked at, again, just as a potential that might occur as well? So it might even happen sooner than you may think too, correct?
Possibly. I mean, again, the official word is that policies aren't changing. And so, the requirements for things like breakthrough designation or orphan drug designation, some of these programs that can lead to expedited review, those requirements haven't changed. That said, I would highly encourage sponsors who are eligible for those or think that they might be eligible to go ahead and try to apply for those, because the faster you can get through reviews, the less time things have to change. So,
okay.
It's definitely one of those, like the bar hasn't shifted yet necessarily on the requirements and what you have to do. But I think the way that we're thinking about it, just knowing tomorrow might be uncertain, the more you can plan in advance, the better off you're going to be.
Okay. Well, given this, what are some examples of successful regulatory strategies that could be put into place that you've seen that could just be maybe disseminated here to the audience?
Yeah, so in a general sense, depending on what kind of product you have, I'm going to use the example that Chris kind of started with, where you have a device manufacturing company that is married to a drug or pharmaceutical company. And I kind of like that analogy too, because it really is a very strong partnership. So you can carry that into your regulatory filing as well. So for example, the device manufacturer can submit some of their information utilizing a device master file or a MAF, which goes to CDRH, so that the majority of the initial submission and any future updates can be made directly by the device manufacturer. And then the notifications can just be made by the drug sponsors that there have been a change to the master file that they're relying on. We also have, if you have electronics, a type 5 DMF that you can utilize to a similar purpose. So you have these mechanisms that you can submit information in a single location that can then be referenced across lots of different submissions. And hopefully that can facilitate more streamlined reviews, more streamlined updates later on, et cetera. So the details of how that works really depends on the type of products that you're looking at. So the quick example is if you are looking at your product, let's say you're the device manufacturer and you're looking at your product and you say, okay, we have this bucket of design inputs that are really drug agnostic. It doesn't matter what we're delivering, but we know this is how the device performs and what we need to verify and validate. That's the kind of information you want to focus on in your master file. You know, identify your key functional attributes, your CQAs, your EDDOs, EPRs, you know, that really can be leveraged, and just focus on that testing. And then conversely, when you have an NDA that is referencing that, the NDA needs to talk about like the whole combination product and how does that device performance meet up with the combination product requirements. So there's still some interplay between the drug sponsor submission and the master file or DMF, but you still can at least streamline how that gets submitted, how that gets reviewed. And then, like I said, future updates can also be a lot easier too.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. I actually want to pull on a thread that you talk about the type of product. I want to actually have Ryan emerge from his safe space, because I know that he's here. You're here, Ryan. I'm not trying to ignore you. But from a product perspective, an actual formulation development perspective, with either biosimilars or even novel therapies, what should be considered here as well in conjunction with the delivery system? What would be something that the life science companies should be keying in on as a factor, or something that's of importance to them?
Yeah, so you know the physical and chemical interactions between the formulation constituent and the device are really key. And you know, data is king in making decisions, and stability is really important. And you can never buy back time. So having those two things in mind, you know, understanding the materials of construction for your platform or your device. Understanding the potential, you know, extractables, leachables, the extraction profile on a platform system, and being able to apply that, you know, across the board, and trying to keep the formulation as simple as possible. You know, the KISS concept of keep it simple, scientists, is really important. And having kind of a first intent formulation guide, you know, when looking at these different platforms, and then starting to look at the physical impacts, right? So viscosity is king, and shear effects on needle gauge, and understanding, you know, where those have bigger impacts on your performance. You know, understanding the extremes. So, you know, what's the sandbox you can play, and what's your design space from the formulation characteristics, the physiochemical properties that will allow you to still perform, you know, in the device.
Can I jump in there a second, Scott? Because I think that's a really key point that Ryan brought up there. I think that rheological behavior of your drug, when we talk autoinjectors especially, you know, knowing how that viscosity changes with concentration, with temperature, with shear, that data is so critical for us on the device side to really make sure we, you know, size the autoinjector properly. We make sure that it's always going to deliver at the injection time that you want consistently. And so the sooner you can generate that data and provide it to your device partner, the better.
Yeah, and the two, you know, the device and the drug product developer can't work in silos. They have to work together. I mean, it's like developing a tablet, right? Going back to, you know, just oral, and then, you know, making it a brick that's just going to sit in the stomach. It's not going to work, you know. So you have to think about how the drug is being introduced into the body, and develop the product to meet that delivery system.
And that would probably be as sooner rather than later, right? As soon as humanly possible,
100%.
Not waiting to generate some data or to come to a certain decision point and then look to select your delivery system, correct?
And yes, and you don't have to know the exact system, you know. So the rheology, getting a shear strain profile for your product, understanding, is it Newtonian, non-Newtonian, how is shear going to impact the product once it hits that orifice, you know, for the needle at that activation force. What's going to happen? You know, are you injecting it over milliseconds or over, you know, a few seconds to a minute? You know, those all have huge implications on how the product is going to perform in vivo.
Okay.
Right. And then we can take that data even before we even select a specific technology. You know, there's modeling and calculations we can do if we know those parameters. or if there's small amounts of drug product available, we can do, kind of characterization tests in certain syringes to see how that'll fit for the autoinjector. But I think getting that partnership going as soon as possible and not waiting to understand that drug device interaction is really critical.
Okay. Well, let's move on to our next topic here, if that's all right with everybody. It's on the formulation factors. Kind of walked through a little bit of that there, Ryan, but I kind of want to also really understand a little more about the quality by design or process optimization that has to be performed early on and how that actually may impact a decision for your platform system. Can you walk through maybe just some of those particulars as well? That'd be great.
Yeah, so with a drug delivery system and in the formulation, your EDDOs or your EPRs are pretty much your critical quality attributes for the delivery of your system. So you have your critical quality attributes of your product itself. So the physiochemical, again, assay, related substances, pH, viscosity. But linking those to the essential performance requirements of the combined product is really important. So the quality by design is, again, that design space, and what are your critical parameters of the formulation itself, as well as of the process that fills out your full design space of not only the drug product constituent, but the entire product once it's combined together to be the finished product. So getting data early and understanding what your extremes are and pushing your product to the point of failure is really important. And again, as Chris mentioned, being able to hand that data over to the device manufacturer, to the device innovator, is really key in the design, because they can make tweaks up front, in the design to not make the index so narrow for success.
Would that then? So then, how do we make sure that feeding into some of the regulatory hurdles? Because you're thinking about some of the development, how does that feed into some of the regulatory compliance challenges and so forth? How does that kind of feed together there, Ryan?
So I think one of the most underutilized documents early on are your TPP and your QTPP, and getting the desired target profiles established early on, especially your QTPP, where you want to achieve these sets of attributes and to be able to deliver to meet this unmet medical need, and getting buyout and handing that over to the device developer, so that you can have conversations. They may say, hey, you're at 48 centipoise historically. Can we get that down a little bit to 27? And I'm just throwing numbers out there, but working with them earlier on to say, okay, here's my sweet spot. Now here are my extremes and where I need to operate in order to be reproducible and get really strong dose accuracy, drug product delivery, reducing that variability over time.
Could you walk through very briefly your quality target product profile, the QTPP, just for the audience here, just what may go into some of those factors? Because again, that may lead into a handoff to the delivery system manufacturer, your platform manufacturer, but also kind of detail out from a regulatory perspective, kind of ties a lot of things together. If you could walk through just a couple of those, that might be great.
Yeah, so your TPP is more of a holistic, cross-functional concept of we want this product with this attributes to meet this clinical need. So it's usually presentation, the indication. It covers more of the clinical aspects, commercial aspirations of the product. But then you get into the QTPP, and so that's your quality target product profile, where you're looking at the critical quality attributes of. It starts with the drug product constituent. So, your bulk drug product and how you intend to use it. 9 times out of 10, a product is going to start in a vial and it's going to then, transition to something else. So you're not really thinking about the life cycle management plays. But if you can start thinking about that earlier on and bringing the drug delivery potentials into the conversations early on, you can then develop a more robust formulation that can be easily adapted to a prefilled syringe, to an auto injector, in due time, because ultimately that's where customers want to go. They want to get out of, the chair time in the clinic to at-home use, most of the time. So, the vial presentation can, usually is shorter lived, depending on the indication, of course. So that's the whole QTPP process is really documenting your aspirations, and it's not a fixed document at the beginning. It's a dynamic document that evolves as your learnings improve and knowledge is gained. And so yeah, don't think it's static, and what you create at IND has to be the same. It has to evolve with development.
It's a living document, correct? That would potentially be looked at either over key inflection points within your development cycle, correct?
Yes. And to bring it in retroactively is usually dangerous and causes a lot of delays. So be as proactive as possible in trying to introduce those documents into your development program, just to guide and to have things on paper to where the cross-functional teams can all agree on what the plan is and what the target attributes are.
Now, Ryan, you mentioned just now it's a little bit dangerous. What can you give an example of what could be a dangerous or a hurdle or something that could really upend a program that way?
So if your development plan, if you're developing a drug product constituent or a drug product in general, without really understanding the intended use of the product and the potential life cycle plays, and you're kind of developing it in a very narrow box to meet one goal, you're not doing the comprehensive development that you could do early on, right? And generating stability data early on, understanding elastomeric, interactions, knowing that you're going to go from a vial to a prefilled syringe or cartridge. So, thinking about it and trying to be a little bit more proactive in the development early on can save you a lot of time and eliminate a lot of decision hurdles in the future, just in terms of the design of the product. It's preventing rework.
Which would be good, correct? And Rachel, from that perspective, what kind of impact could that have on submission timelines that may be seen by this?
Yeah, I'm really glad this is where we're going with the conversation, because the TPP is always my starting point. No matter where a program is, if I'm coming on, I'm new to a client, where's your TPP? Where does it stand? And a lot of times people tell me, well, we're early stage, so we don't have one. Mm-hmm. Day one, you want to have a TPP, and it's okay to have TBDs. It's okay to have, blanks if you don't know, but the TPP becomes a really critical document for communication across groups, because it's a really good place to document your must-haves versus your nice-to-haves. If there are attributes with the drug product, like from a stability standpoint, it cannot go above a given temperature. It's just not going to happen. Then the device people know that there are limitations to use, and that needs to be considered when designing the device, or vice versa. If the device has a fixed delivery volume and there's concentration concerns about making sure that the drug product can fit in that, then you got to look at your overall dose. So those kinds of program limitations can be identified really early on if you're trying to work through this TPP and identify what you have to do. And that is a good way to get the drug people and device people talking, and because that's another area that I see as roadblocks, whether from a regulatory perspective or development standpoint. That's a key roadblock, is getting the two groups to talk to each other. It's one thing when you have two companies and they have to have cross communication, but even within the same company, I've seen this be a challenge, where you have your clinical team, you have your formulation team, you have your device team, and they're not all talking to each other. Everybody's focused on their key milestones, and then they try to bring it together in the clinic, and all of a sudden things don't match. You could have avoided that early on if everybody sat in a room and just hammered out a draft TPP, even if it's just draft. So, that's why these documents are so critical. I cannot emphasize enough doing them early, even if you don't have all the answers. You're not expected to have the answers. It is a living document, but that really becomes your guidepost for your regulatory submission too, because then that tells you this is the story. This is what we're delivering. This is our intended use. This is our goal. This is why we're safe and effective. And hey, at the end of the day, it makes marketing people happy too, because this is how we're differentiated.
Yeah, those are all great points. It actually made me think of something, really important in terms of formulation design. So the concentration, right? So what is your target, concentration ranges as you're going into the clinic? And if you're operating at the edge of saturation in terms of concentration with your drug product, that could be a huge roadblock. As you go into the dose ranging, if you show efficacy at the higher range, but there's the potential to crash out, and you have to reformulate, rechange your whole formulation strategy. That's a deal breaker, in phase 2 in my mind. If you have to change to a more complex formulation technology, right, and outsource in-license a technology to achieve higher concentrations, that's a big deal. And you want to kind of flesh all that out early on and have those conversations with the cross-functional group, so that you can say, hey, I cannot achieve 350 mgs of this, of this MAB. And you just have those conversations up front, and it puts you on the right path to success early on.
It also has a lot of also has a lot of potential impact on the delivery system selection, because that if you have that issue, for example, you mentioned, and if you don't know the volume yet, and you're going in phase 2, and you have this sort of huge range of potentials, I mean, that could put you either in a different variant within the technology, or could even move you, say, from like an auto-injector to an on-body, and then maybe you're not even talking to the right companies anymore. So I think if that, identifying those risks early enough so that you can really plan for them, or figure out how you basically de-risk those questions as soon as possible, before getting all the other stakeholders involved, would be really key.
Great. No, thanks there, Chris. I appreciate that. All right, let's get to the next slide, because I want to make sure I have enough time to get through a lot of our discussion points. And it does talk a little bit about the risk management elements of your program. A life science company that is looking to de-risk their program, their development. Some of the pieces here, I really want to understand, actually, what are some of those technical challenges and how to de-risk them appropriately. Ryan, from you kind of touched on a little bit, from a vial to a prefilled syringe to an autoinjector for the formulation. What are some of the considerations that are critical in moving through these types of delivery systems, these methods?
Yeah. And so again, the big thing when moving from vial to prefilled syringe to autoinjector is understanding that mechanism of injection, and expelling the solution, into the body, and the physical effects on the product. So again, viscosity and shear effects are really important. When you have a manual injection over time versus a very, very rapid auto injection, it matters. So understanding that rheological profile is really, really critical. And then container interactions. You go from a vial, a glass vial. Yes, you have an elastomeric stopper, but typically there's headspace differences there, so you don't have constant contact. Hopefully, you would do an inverted stability study to understand that. But the physical impacts of constant solution contact with the elastomer, does it swell, does it shrink? Are there chemical interactions going on? Understanding those early are really important to success, because you would hate to get
Sorry, Ryan, would almost doing a decoupling study out of the gate with the components that you're looking to utilize be advantageous, just to eliminate one component, or where in the system, if there's an adverse interaction, where it may lie, correct?
Yeah. Understanding if the elastomer is going to swell, because that's going to stop, the movement, you're going to have more friction there, or is it going to shrink and then compromise your sterility barrier? Those are two completely different ends of the spectrum, but equally as important. So yes.
And actually, as you mentioned some of the data, Ryan. So Rachel, how can life science companies here leverage some of the existing data to streamline some of the pathways to success how can they leverage some of this data to be a little more effective and efficient, if possible? What are some of the strategies that might be able to be employed?
Yeah, so there's two main ones. I mean, I kind of touched earlier on some of the design verification attributes where, you really look at your drug agnostic design inputs and say, okay, what of this platform, it really doesn't matter what I'm putting in it, it's still going to perform the same. And so that's one way to leverage data. Another area we haven't really touched on that I think is key on this topic is human factors. When you're really looking at your human factors program, knowing that you're developing a platform, thinking in advance of who your potential users might be, not even for your initial product, but down the line, there's a lot of work you can do up front with your human factors program that can then make it easier to leverage later on. So for instance, let's say you have a generally healthy population that would be interacting with the delivery system to start, but then later you might be introducing patients with dexterity impairments or visual impairments, et cetera. If you can bring some of that into your summative program early on and enroll a range of users, then that summative study could be the validation across lots of different combination products, as long as you're able to justify the similarities in the patient populations. And so that's a key area where I've seen a lot of leveraging being done, pointing back to the same validation studies for your usability, because it's in general going to be the same device interacting with the same types of users. So there's the same usability risks that need to be considered.
Well, and kind of pulling on that thread there, Rachel, for you, Chris, I'm curious just what kind of understanding or device technology expertise that Rachel was kind of talking about. How might that help really provide proper implementation from development of a drug all the way through the development of the combination product and into submission? Where does that role in the risk, trying to de-risk or mitigate risk with some of those elements? Can you maybe touch on a couple of points there? That might be really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've hit some of them so far. I mean, I think when you're these drug delivery systems are always it's really a system integration problem. You've got to understand that boundary, and that can be the how the rheology of the drug interacts with the container, how that container selection you have interacts with the delivery system, how the forces it applies. And the more all the parties kind of can understand those interfaces, the better. One of the things we've done at Hasselmeyer is we really want to make sure we have people within the development team that have a pharma background as well, and really understand how within a molecule development, you don't always know those answers, but you need to be able to understand when that information can become available, when it can be applied, and really plan for it. So,
okay.
And it's, the best customers we have are ones that understand devices as well. If we have to educate the customers on how device interfaces works, it just adds just an extra layer to the challenges we have. But we're happy to work with them too. So,
of course.
I think the biggest thing is again understanding that the development can't be in isolation. You can't just develop a drug product constituent and expect it to work in every device. There has to be considerations given to the device that you're choosing to meet your needs, and it's not a one size fits all. So communication is key.
And I think it's back to how Rachel talked about. I mean, the way these get evaluated is this combination product. It's the whole system together. And, on the device side, we're making some assumptions on what's needed for various drugs, which ones might be appropriate for our platforms. But in the end, it's got to be everything coming together as one unit. And the sooner that you can do that, the better. If you wait till right before the clinical study, you're going to have issues.
Okay. All right, let's transition to our Q&A, because that's we're right on time for that, which is great. So from the audience, if you guys have additional questions, that would be wonderful. I want to make sure that we give enough time and breadth for our panelists to walk through them. There was a question on EPRs being replaced by EDDOs in the draft guidance. I guess, Rachel, this may be for you or other panelists. I don't want to preclude the others, but do we feel, guys, that is this the way that the guidance is coming, that we're getting rid of essential performance requirements?
Honestly, no. I mean, first of all, the EDDO guidance is in draft, and so nothing is
That takes
final.
17 years. So we'll have 17 years until it's done, is what you're saying, correct?
I'm objectively not commenting on FDA timelines for guidance finalization.
I'm used to these draft
Particular.
guidances being put in place, but then they take years upon decades to be finalized. So just
Well,
using my
and this one in particular was a long time coming. The industry knew that the FDA was working on an EPR guidance, and it took a while to get there. And I think the reason why it took a while to get there is because, again, this is an area where there's a lot of benefit to looking at each combination product individually. And so if FDA comes in with a really strong stance of these are the EPRs for an autoinjector, these are the EPRs for a prefilled syringe, there might be something unique about your product that they want to consider. And if they've backed themselves into a corner with these really prescriptive guidances, then it's going to cause a lot of difficulty during review. So, the formal answers, EPRs were never actually defined anywhere. This was just kind of something that was coming out in regulatory feedback and discussions with the agency. Then they put out the EDDO guidance, which changed the language a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's what the FDA had been expecting for quite some time. And so, the recommendation that I typically give is look at the guidance, look at your program. What design outputs make sense to be listed as EPRs or EDDOs for your program? The one big difference I will say is they take a broader definition of EDDOs than what was historically kind of assumed for EPRs in terms of looking at like early preparation steps and maybe notifications on the back end after delivery. So look at what makes sense for your program, because at the end of the day, that's what the FDA is going to do. And you need to justify your selections for your EPRs or your EDDOs for your product, no matter what's in the guidance.
Okay. Thanks, Rachel. Any other follow-up or comments, Ryan or Chris, on that?
Actually, hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, and I think we're waiting to see how submissions now, what kind of feedback people get as they're starting to use EDDOs and where FDA is going with this. And I think it's going to be a continual evolving topic, unfortunately.
No, I think you're right, Chris. Okay, another question we got from the audience was specifically on the QTPP and where would we actually have it fit? I know that in terms of the design controls, but before design controls come into play, it's really we worked through feasibility on this. And I'm going to kind of point this to you, Ryan. Where would that fit out of the gate? Would that be something a little bit later on? Where would we really start to employ putting a QTPP or even a TPP together?
So at a project team, construction, one of the core team deliverables should be, first a TPP, cross-functional, TPP at the core team level, and then at the technical core team. So your, formulation, process, analytical, engineers on the drug delivery side, kind of coming together and having as a core team output from the technical team, this QTPP. And so it's kind of at project conception, as Rachel mentioned, all of the boxes don't need to be filled out. There can be some, to be determined or unknown at this time. Report results are fine for some of the, aspirations. But it lives within that core technical team. It's on the agenda, you're talking about it, not every time, but, at major milestones and inflection points along the way. You have to, do the work and get the data before you can update it. You have to have justification, but it just lives in that core team.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Ryan. Mm-hmm. Another question we had was to discuss the equivalence between the two devices in terms of human factor studies. How would we prove equivalence between two different, platform delivery systems, or maybe it's going from a prefilled to an autoinjector, but you can't really, I don't know if you're going to be able to provide equivalence. Who would like to take that question? I'm going to leave that up to you three panelists.
I could speak to that a bit if no one jumps in. I mean, I think we, and maybe Rachel, so correct me if I'm with the regulatory side as well. I mean, I think we have a couple different avenues in the way FDA talks about this. I mean, we have within the ANDA, you have an opportunity to show interchangeability through a threshold analysis. So, this is really showing that you have equivalent use steps, that you can really map the understanding of how to use the device onto the new device. And that's, I think, maybe the simplest way. I think obviously the much more challenging is the comparative human factors study, because the threshold to really, or the acceptance criteria for that's a bit more challenging. They really want to see larger sample sizes than we typically would do in a human factors study. And I think it's then a question also of, do you need to show comparability, or do you just need to show that the new device is good enough? And then you can kind of do maybe more standard human factors engineering or usability engineering approaches.
Yeah, I like that answer. I mean, because the regulatory canned answer is, well, you do it in a threshold analysis, but obviously the real answer is more complicated than that. And it does depend on what you're trying to show. Like, are you trying, when you say prove equivalence, are you trying to do it from an ANDA perspective, or are you trying to say that, you know, this device does not raise any new questions of safety or effectiveness, in which case we would need to look beyond just human factor studies. And that's where, you know, there is a guidance on bridging. We didn't get to discuss a lot of bridging challenges or topics today, but, you know, it's been interesting because the FDA put out this bridging guidance, and yet they really, at the end of the day, want to see data, whether it's human factors data to show comparable use between products, whether it's clinical data to show comparative bioavailability. You know, a lot of the times, you know, a lot of these paper exercises don't really get you across the finish line. They really want to see the data to back up any claims that you have in terms of being equivalent products.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be probably a nice follow-up webinar topic there, Rachel, on bridging studies that we can potentially put out there. Just saying for the masses here, it's something that will food for thought. I'll talk to our management about that. I see one also. Have we worked on cross-labeled combination products where the device is not the primary container for the drug, and any specific considerations need to be made there? Not quite on the platform side, but Ryan, I guess maybe some of the considerations we would have where the device is not the primary container.
Yeah. So you could think of, so some of the on-body systems where you might have a vial and the drug is loaded, into the on-body system, and
or like reusable insulin pens, I guess would be the type of thing that this question might be envisioning.
Yeah. So, again, it's generating the data in how it's going to be delivered in vivo, and understanding yes, you have a primary container system, but then once you get the drug into the delivery system, how it's going to perform is key. I think, long-term stability isn't really the focus. It's, in-use stability and in-use performance, and understanding, those extremes and those limits and the design space there from the product perspective.
Okay. Thanks, Ryan. I think this is a question for you, Chris. Do manufacturers of platform delivery systems ever run into an issue where they encounter a challenge or a problem with one customer's application that potentially negatively impacts all their customer applications of that same delivery system? And if so, is that a risk of using a platform delivery system? That's a question I was going to have at the very end, versus bespoke versus platform delivery systems. I was going to be asking you, but I guess maybe I'll morph that into a larger one for you, Chris. Using a bespoke or a one-off versus a platform, the advantages and disadvantages. How would you navigate that, and how would you discuss some of those elements with your client?
Yeah, so I think maybe on the first part of the question, I think, again, because the FDA doesn't regulate platforms, they regulate combination products. I think there's not going to be a sort of, I think, direct feedback from one application that would impact another. I think clearly if you had, it's the same group of reviewers typically for similar type of products. So we have seen where, we get similar feedback potentially on similar products, but I think you don't have that immediate kind of knock-on effect of, product A gets rejected out of a platform and that affects every other product because they're looking at them individually. And in
Right.
reality, even within the implementation within a device company, we're not, I mean, there are differences, at least at Hasselmeier, we try and maintain separate design history files for each of our customers, so we're not, you know, kind of having too much overlap between customer submissions documents, so to try and minimize that as well. On the general, I think platform versus a bespoke device. I think, you know, when we talked about the benefits, it's the time to market, it's lower investment, it's lower technical risk. But I think what you lose then is, of course, you know, a platform is available to a lot of people. You see in certain drug categories where, you know, all the drugs are using basically the same device. And so I think you need, with a platform, if you're going with a platform, the differentiator needs to end up being your molecule. So if your molecule is highly differentiated, then I think a bespoke device doesn't give you a lot of benefit, because the molecule is what's really driving your differences. If you're in a biosimilar, then potentially device can be now a much bigger differentiator. So it's either, you know, picking maybe what you see as the best platform in the market, trying to negotiate some kind of exclusivity, or doing, you know, small customizations, for example, to maybe improve the human factors for your specific patient population or something like that. And that's where, I mean, at least for us, the platform is a starting point, and we're very happy to offer a pure platform, but we can also tailor that platform, and we do a lot of kind of small customizations, sort of derivative products from that platform to really meet very unique challenges for a specific molecule.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. I think we have a few more minutes. I think we do have a couple more questions. One of them was, how far can you leverage data or device verification data that's performed with a platform device using drug surrogates in a submission? And how much testing do you think regulatory bodies would expect to be repeated with the actual drug product, the actual API? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I think I could jump in there. At least when we look at injectables, I mean, I think for the sort of functional attributes of the device, you need to be able to show that your drug has equivalent physical properties. You know, these were all the things that Ryan talked about as whatever surrogate is used. And so if you really understand your drug, then surrogate data is probably usable. But if you really can't show that equivalence of the physical properties, it's really hard to justify.
Yeah, I would agree with that, completely. And, I mean, typically you can use your placebo, and you have to demonstrate that the drug, with or without the drug, there is no, impact to that data, and that the data is fully representative of how it would be with the drug in there. So, if you have I know you don't have a lot of suspensions in, auto-injectors, but if you had a suspension, right, I would think that you wouldn't be able to leverage any surrogates there. But solutions, I think, it's all risk-based and based on the data that you have, and let the data guide your justification for why that surrogate is appropriate, and presented early on.
Okay.
I
I've
think
seen a lot of
functional. Yeah, go ahead, Rachel. Sorry.
No, sorry. I've just seen a lot of feedback for like IND and NDA submissions. The use of surrogates really focused on the verification data, having data with the actual drug product, but then you can leverage that data, like Ryan said, to justify using a surrogate for your batch release testing. So it doesn't need to be continuously used on an ongoing basis, but you need to have the data up front to demonstrate that your surrogate is representative of your drug product, unless there's something like just glaringly obvious about your formulation that it can be, submitted without that.
Okay. Lastly, guys, I do want to make sure I touch on with everybody, for a smaller organization, what would be some advice you might give to a smaller company, either a virtual or just small in terms of FTEs, how to navigate effectively some of these complex challenges that we've just talked about for the last 59 minutes? What would be some of the advice that you guys may give? Just I want to make sure each of you can have, from the panelists, to have a little bit of time to just kind of take that away. Rachel, why don't you start? Then Chris, then Ryan. I think that'd be great.
I mean, my
Put you on the
biggest
spot.
piece.
Sorry, Rachel. I put you right on
No,
the
you're
spot
totally
there. Apologies.
fine. No, I mean, 'cause there's a lot of directions I wanted to go with that. That's why I
Sure.
kind of hesitated. Because really, at the end of the day, I keep going back to start with your TPP. Start at the end. Really understand who are your intended users. What is your intended use? What are you trying to accomplish? What unmet medical need are you trying to fulfill? Because at the end of the day, your product is intended to help patients. And so my key advice, big company, large companies, tiny company, doesn't matter. Focus on the end, focus on what you're trying to do, and use that as your guidepost all the way through your development, because it's just so easy to get lost in the engineering. It's so easy to get lost in the chemistry to really, we're going to optimize, this formulation. But at the end of the day, if it doesn't meet what the patient needs, you haven't really made a quality product that's going to sell.
Well, that's great advice. Chris.
Yeah, I think, and going a different way on that, I think recognize that this is a complex problem we're trying to do with mixing pharmaceuticals, formulations, containers, devices, and be really clear on sort of where your expertise is and focus on that, and then find the right partners that can really fill those other gaps within the whole ecosystem, and try and find, ones that also can take up as many different pieces, I think, of that value chain. Because I think, if you look at some of these products with a big pharma company, there's going to be maybe even 20 suppliers over that entire value chain to get from the molecule to the finished product. And that's a lot of suppliers to manage for a small company. So the more you can find partners that can take up multiple pieces within that value chain, I think the simpler. But make sure they're ones you can trust, make sure they're going to their missions align with yours. They're going to give you the attention you need for the size of the company you are.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. That's great advice too. And Ryan.
Yeah. So, I think as you look through the development life cycle of a drug product, the biggest thing is don't be naive in thinking that your vial is going to go straight into something else. If there is the chance for a prefilled syringe or delivery system, do the work earlier on to understand the rheology and the potential, physiochemical interactions with the attributes of delivery systems. So, siliconization of the syringe, the tungsten with the needles. Understand what the product will be, come across in the future when you do look at these delivery systems. And just don't think that you can take it and put in, it's plug and play in all the other different systems going from a vial. So do the work up front. It'll save you a lot of time.
Okay. Well, thanks, Ryan. And I want to give a real shout out and thanks to my panelists today, Rachel, Chris, Ryan. Thank you very much for taking the time to really educate the audience and those beyond of all the complex hurdles and challenges that may be faced by a lot of our partners and life science companies that are in this space, looking to find ways to de-risk, find ways to be more efficient, find ways to be more effective in getting their product to market. I am getting the knock on my door here that it's past noon, and so my kids want to get back onto their electronics. I have told them that they've had to get off the last hour or so, and they're on spring break. So now they're saying, "Dad, you're done." So I guess we're going to we are going to be closing up this particular webinar. But please, if there are any additional questions that you may have for any of us from the panel today, please feel free to reach out to myself, Chris, Rachel, and Ryan. We would be more than happy and willing to help you out with any question or comments that you may have. And if there is any other comments that you may need, you can visit our website at www.chimanox.com. But again, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today. And if there is anything else you need from me, please don't hesitate to reach out.